Welcome to the Women Changing the World podcast, a podcast on a mission to bring you some of the most amazing women I know who are doing incredible things to generally make the world a better place. From corporate sustainability to straight up magic and everything in between, you'll meet the real life humans who are birthing the new. I'm your host, Liz Best, and I'm here to amplify the stories and voices of women who are changing the world. Hello, I am so excited for today's conversation with Jessica Lackey, a strategy and operations advisor who blends business strategy, practical application, and a human-centric approach to create sustainable businesses. With a background in corporate leadership, McKinsey & Company consulting, and a Harvard business degree, Jessica knows a thing or two about hustle culture and what it feels like to judge success by the bottom line at all costs. Now she combines her deep experience in consulting, Fortune 500 operations leadership, and coaching to help businesses grow without sacrificing the well-being of our clients, team, and community. We talked about so many topics that are so close to my entrepreneurial heart in this conversation, including the sexy, not sexy work of defining your business model, the 6 systems your business needs, the role of subcontracting in stabilizing your income when you're first getting started or throughout your journey, how the 3 sisters model of planting can be applied to your business, Jessica's definition of leadership, and so much more. Jessica is someone who I deeply admire for many reasons. She brings together deep business expertise and feminist business practices to help entrepreneurs stop feeling like we're gambling at a casino, haphazardly applying tactics in our work, and start feeling like we know exactly what deep foundations to plant and water and nurture for long-term success. Let's get into it. Welcome to the podcast, Jessica. It's so great to have you.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Oh my goodness. Well, maybe before we jump in, I have so many things I'm excited to talk to you about today, but would you like to just quickly say hello and introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yes, I'm Jessica Lackey, based in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I am a business and operations strategist that works with expertise-based business owners to help them put in place the business foundations for growth and scale.
I love it. Well, let's start there. I feel like it's always so fun to hear on the podcast what people are up to like right now in this moment, both personally and professionally. So would love to hear what's currently happening in your world, in your day-to-day.
In my day-to-day right now, I'm kind of shoring up the foundations of my own business. So I've been in business now, as we're recording this, 3.5 years. I have patterns of what's working, how I can be more effective with my clients. And I'm starting to put what are the patterns that I'm seeing with my clients and like the order of operations in which we need to do the work. And so I'm putting some courses together, some more templates and tools, some little videos, things like that, trying to organize all the templates and things I've created over the years. That's one thing that's happening in my day-to-day. So serving clients and also trying to build the next version of my business while I'm doing that.
The never ending, I don't even know what the right metaphor is for that ride that we're on. Like delivery and improving behind the scenes is always like such a fun dance.
Yep. Build the systems, run the systems, deliver the business. That's how I like frame it for my clients. And so trying to practice what I preach with my clients. Can't be too busy just kind of like being on the hamster wheel of creating and managing content. Can't be ignoring the business building work and can't staff myself too much on too many client projects. So really the delicate balance of operating a business.
Totally. Well, and just because I think it's also fun to get to know people on a personal level, would love to know like one fun non-work fact about what's bringing you joy right now in this moment.
Not so much joy, but more. So my dog, Logan, he is 15 pounds, a Pomeranian Pekingese rat terrier. A few months ago, he tore his little doggy ACL. So his cruciate something ligament, so his little CCL. And so he's not allowed to go up and down stairs. So that means that I pick him up and we take him upstairs that's not joyful, but it is like my dog and I have bonded because now we literally are together almost all the time. And, he's literally with me up and down stairs 10 to 12 times a day.
Oh my gosh, that's so sweet. I hope he has a swift recovery.
He's doing really good. He had a big surgery. It is fine, but my husband was out of town this weekend. And so him and I I'm like, I could go to the grocery store or I could just order on DoorDash and I could do something or I could just take him around. And he has a little doggy stroller right now. So, cause he's real small. And so people look at us and he was like, a dog's in a stroller. I'm like, he's recovering from surgery. But yes, the dog's in the stroller.
Oh my goodness. What a specific moment that we find you in. Oh, we're sending him all the healing vibes. Thank you for sharing. That's fun to know, even though I know it's not fun to live right now in this moment. Well, shifting to the work side of things, I know you've had a really interesting journey to get here to doing what you're doing today. And I know our listeners really like hearing the story of how you came to be in this moment, how you came to be doing this work in the world, what's inspiring you about what you're doing right now. And so would really love to invite you to take up space, tell your story, give us the long version. How did you come to be here working with people to build deeper foundations in their businesses?
So I started climbing the corporate ladder. Didn't realize this was what I was doing. I had an engineering degree from Virginia Tech. I went and got grad school at Penn State for engineering. Didn't know what I wanted to do. Tried to follow a boy to Boston and ended up working at McKinsey & Company doing operations consulting. When you're at McKinsey, doors open, but doors close. So the only natural thing to do after consulting is go to business school. So I went to Harvard Business School. And the only natural thing to do after Harvard Business School is to get a job after business school. That's one of 3 different jobs. I worked at Nike for ended up being 7 years in their operations, so various roles in supply chain. So I spent my entire 20s kind of climbing the educational and corporate ladder, hit mid 30s in some pretty gnarly jobs. These are the 2 jobs assigned to one person type of jobs. Hit one of those and I just completely kind of fell apart. I had a panic attack in my boss's office. I realized I had a problem with alcohol and food, and I had no friends that weren't colleagues. I didn't have anything outside of my work. And I knew I needed to make a change. So in 2015, I ended up moving out of the job I was in to a different job. But also on the weekends, I joined a part-time holistic nutrition certification program because I realized that I was so in the pain cave, as it were. I didn't know who I was or what I wanted, but I knew I wasn't taking very good care of myself as a human being. So the first place I started was Eastern medicine and food, right? That's what called to me. I was living in Portland, Oregon at the time. So that's very appropriate. And then I said, this is really interesting. I want to help more people. So I thought I would become a health coach. Turned out that loved coaching as a concept, didn't want to be a health coach. Ended up deciding, okay, now I know more about the kind of life I wanted to live and realized I didn't want to try to put down roots in Portland because it was too far away from my family. Got a job, my last job in Charlotte, North Carolina, where my family lives now. So I got a corporate promotion to Charlotte, but I knew this wasn't what I wanted. I knew staying in corporate wasn't what I wanted. I'm at that point, I'd broken through the matrix and realized, okay, this is just paying the bills right now until I am stable enough to really make the leap and know what I want to do, what it is I want to do when I grow up. And COVID happened. And I told my bosses in 2020, in January, I was delivering a huge project for a transformational project for my company. And I said, I will be leaving this job at the end of the project. And they're like, what do you mean? Where are you going to go? I'm I don't know, but it's not this. And then COVID happened. I got married. We bought the house. I realized that I could start doing more remote consulting work. And so in March 2021, I bounced and I leapt open to join my own or to create my own consulting firm. I didn't have any idea really what I was going to do, but since then I've been cobbling it together. And now I clearly have a point of view.
Thank you so much for sharing the journey and the twists and turns. Yeah, I know there's a few juicy leaps in there of getting off maybe path the more traveled path and being like, this, what do I want? What do I want to do next? What does my next chapter look like? And also just appreciate the realness. I think so many of us who do entrepreneurial things have a knowing that we want to do something entrepreneurial long before the moment when we like fling the doors open, so to speak. And I think there's often a lot of good reasons to like keep doing the corporate thing or whatever the thing is that we're doing to like prepare for that. From the outside, sometimes it can seem like people just wake up one day and leave their job or start their business. But I know for so many of us, it's like, no, we woke up one day with the idea and there were months and months that went into the moment of actually being like, okay, I'm ready. It's time.
Yeah, I knew that this was going to be my last job. I knew it, like, I thought maybe I could hang on and no, but like when I got married, I'm like, great. Now the things that were standing in my way of like full-time entrepreneurship, the house and the medical insurance, I love my husband very, very much. And being married means I don't have to figure out the marketplace. Those are two real barriers holding me back. So once we got married, it's like, all right, I got like some months to get my network in place and figure out what it is I really want to do. Because it's not leadership coaching. It certainly wasn't health coaching. I never even like got a client doing that. I thought I came out thinking it was going to be project management, chief of staff work. And even when I left, I still had subcontracting consulting jobs for like a year and a half to like tide me over. That's actually where I made most of my money. My first year and a half was on contract consulting work, not, from operations, not business consulting work. So I kind of have safety netted my way into a book of business. But I certainly didn't like jump out and be like, I'm going to make all this money in my very first year. I jumped out and I'm like, I don't really know what I'm doing in business building. And let's cobble together what I can for the first year and a half.
I love that. And I so appreciate your transparency and talking about the real numbers and what this has looked like. And I definitely want to get into that. And maybe before we do, would love to hear from 2021 to now, what has it looked like? How has your business evolved over the past 3.5 years?
Yeah. So when I leapt out in 2021, I really thought I knew I wanted to do business consulting in some way, shape, or form. I thought I was going to come out being like fractional COO, chief operations officer, which I have done and do still. But what's interesting is what's evolved is that I started 2021 kind of like fell into some more feminist spaces. And the feeling I got was like being good at business was a liability. And having my corporate background was something to be ashamed of. Like I worked at McKinsey and Company. I worked at Harvard Business School. These are the paragons of capitalism. Like how dare we trust you to be a leader in the space? Like I felt the pressure to kind of step away from that work. But as I kind of tried to build my own coaching business, I realized how little business building information is provided in these spaces. It's all marketing. And I'm like, great. No one's talking about actually like all my corporate experience left me seeing like what's missing from all of the nonsense being peddled to coaches and consultants and people starting their businesses and service providers. I'm like, oh, this is all, if I ignore my corporate background, I'm doing a disservice to my clients. I'm doing a disservice to the marketplace. If I only rest on my corporate background, I'm doing a disservice to the marketplace and things like that. So it really has been this process of bringing both sides of me back together, the corporate side, the side that watched how McKinsey and Company did a consulting project, that watched how Nike ran a $50 billion process to bring clothes to the marketplace. There's a lot of structure in that. Don't love the incentive structure, but there's a lot of structure in that. That's what really been like the evolution of my business is how can I merge the corporate and the feminist together for something that's practical and really action oriented. So that's been one evolution that's really meant a lot to me in the business.
Oh, I love hearing about that. And I think I was just talking to a friend about this over the weekend. I think for so many of us who come from like a corporate background or whatever organizational background we may come from, at least I know for me in my like earliest stages, like I felt, wanting to be in a feminine leadership space, I felt like I had to reject so much of my background, of my training, of where I came from. There was just so much about the world that I wanted and still want to help create, and feeling like it involved like a wholesale rejection of like that experience. And I think, and I watched this for me and for so many of my clients, it's like we come out and we're like all the way on one side of things. And then like there's this slow integration of, oh, wait, actually, what makes me really powerful and what makes the work I do in the world really powerful is the combination of the two, is the fact that we get how the capitalist patriarchal systems like are working and can work. And we bring this feminist lens to like, how can I integrate that knowledge and background and brilliance and expertise in service of a different way of doing things?
Yeah. I like to think that like when you combine capitalism and feminism, you get commerce. And so how do we do commerce and build businesses with both lenses, that it doesn't have to be extracting profit for shareholders and stakeholders. It can be building a business with all of the stakeholders in alignment and in concert and towards a shared vision versus one party over indexing on the benefits.
Totally. Well, before I want to get into like deeper foundations in business building, but you did allude earlier to like the role that subcontracting has played in your business. And I think this is something that like I personally have really appreciated in the past year in particular. I know something we've bonded over is like how important it is to share real numbers and real context for entrepreneurial journeys and the valuable role that things like subcontracting can play in not only stabilizing our income, but also creating safety for us as entrepreneurs and running our businesses. So I'd love to hear a little bit more, if you're open to sharing, about like the role that subcontracting has served and played in your journey to date.
Yeah. So the first year I came out of business, and I have a YouTube on this. I don't know if I publicly share the numbers, but I made, I came out and I needed to make 100 grand. So I did, but only 30 of that came from coaching. And none of that came from any kind of group leverage programs. And like the other 75 to 90K came from contract consulting gigs that were, I did like, I think I did some project management work from like a matching program. My old role was sales and operations planning. So I did that part-time. It gave me two benefits in the first year. One is it gave me income, but two, it also like filled 20 hours a week, which meant that I'm a very planful person in general, but like my days had some structure. So I didn't have to like fill up the rest of my days with how am I going to do to grow my business? Like I was like, all right, well, I got to be thoughtful about what I do because it's got to fit into 20 hours a week because I got 20 hours, working on somebody else's project. The second year, one of my strategy clients actually departed with their fractional COO. So I stepped in to do fractional COOing for about 6 to 12 months for one of my kind of like still hands in the work, but under my book of business. Still had some other contract consulting gigs through a network I was a part of from former Nike people. And then this is the first year that I haven't worked on anything supply chain related. It's my fourth year in business. And it's the first year I've departed from that. It's been slow. And this is also the first year I introduced a group program in the very end of 22. And I had like 4 people in it. And then that's kind of been growing since. But it's kind of taken a while to build group programs, build up membership. Do not recommend trying to build like all these business models at a time because I guarantee you it crushes me some days. And I'm like, I'm trying to unwind some of the business models I have built. So like every year there's like a big client that drops and it fills with something else that's more aligned. And so that's been the big process over the next couple of years, last 2 years is like, this is no longer an aligned client or aligned business model or offer for me. Like, let's drop that. Let's create the space for something new to show up. But it's definitely been a shift in where the revenue from the business comes in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know my journey has been similar in that, I think my first year, after my first couple of years of business, it was like, I want to say like 50% of my revenue was coming from consulting and 50% was coming from like coaching, group programs, the soul work. And like, it's looked different over each of the last 3 years for different reasons with different priorities. And I'm also like, oh my gosh, I so hear you on intentionally and sometimes more often unintentionally building additional business models into my business model. Being like, wait, I'm running like 5 businesses. This is a lot. So that actually feels like a really nice segue because I want to talk more about deeper foundations specifically and your deep dive methodology. Also talk about business models and all the things, but maybe using deeper foundations as the jumping off point. What do you mean when you talk about deeper foundations in a business context?
So I really mean that a lot of times we're taught tactics. We're taught do this, not this. And so we end up hopping from tactic to tactic, from strategy to strategy without saying, well, how does my business operate together? What's the systems approach to how my business runs, which is based on the systems approach for how my business is designed. And when we operate from what I call the tactics trap, we just gamble on tactics. We're like, is this tactic going to work? Is this tactic going to work? And so we end up stuck. But when we think about building foundations, we build really the root structure across the front end and the back end of our businesses that allow us to have compounding results. So the deeper our foundational roots grow in our business and the deeper our business stability is from the bottoms up, means that we can support a larger business without fearing that it's going to topple over. So when we build deeper foundations, we really get to the root and the heart of our business. I have 6 systems that we implement as part of this process, all stemming from the business design. And then small actions compound from there, just like growing a tree. It's like, you don't just go and be like, all right, tree now. Like, it grows ring by ring, root by root. And these are the types of foundations I put in place. What I found was really missing from the market is 2 or 3 things. I didn't formalize this before we got on the call. One is no one starts with business model. And we'll talk more about that, I think. But no one starts with like, what business are you actually running? And what size and stage is that? Because the strategies look very different depending on the types of business you run. So we got very few people say like, they just assume you're a life coach. And so like, if you're a life coach, then the next thing you must do is like have a group program for life coaching. I'm like, well, is that the business you want to run? I don't know. Let's talk about that. Or you're a consultant. Well, the next thing you must do is build agency. I'm like, I don't know. Do you want to build an agency? Let's talk about it. No one talks about that. And I think this is maybe like an ego thing, but like, I think there's only like 1 or 2 other like quote unquote competitors on the market who are addressing all aspects of business, including the unsexy ones. Like a lot of people are talking about authority building and about marketing and about sales and about maybe a CFO and maybe your Notion person. I'm like, well, that's great. But in isolation, who knows if that's like the right thing that they should be working on at any given time. My job is to help you set the foundations across your business. And most importantly, decide what is it that you actually need to do next, not should you do this at all. Like, do you need to focus on marketing or do you not know who your client is? We got to go do that first. And then almost every program in the marketplace feels very short, and very scaled. And I'm like, well, I think I can do it differently or better in the sense that like, you can't build foundations in a 6-week intensive. You can't build foundations in a 1-week boot camp. It requires month after month, year after year of building. And I want to be that person that guides people through that journey over time. That's my personality, is like low and slow. That's what I think, like deeper foundations. Like you can't just like plant tree roots and build deeper foundations in like a 2-day boot camp. You just can't.
Totally. Oh my goodness. Yes, I agree so much. And also just a shout out for you because I have certainly spent a lot of time dabbling in the business building coaching ecosystem. And I personally am not aware of anyone who is doing this work and offering what you provide through a lens of low and slow or small as all, or like really like values aligned business building. I think there's a lot of ways to learn this that borrow from the like systems and approaches that are often really harmful for entrepreneurs like us. And so it's just really refreshing to see the way that you are bringing in, I think, values that really resonate with certainly me and a lot of my listeners into like the how of how you actually build a business and how you actually make those next right decisions for the long term and not just for that short term cash infusion or short term win that's not actually like giving you the compounding results that you're looking for. I am interrupting this episode of the Women Changing the World podcast really quickly to personally invite you to join the Girls Club Collective. The Girls Club Collective is an intentionally intimate feminine leadership lab for change agents and the personal and professional development community that you've been looking for. Don't just take my word for it, though. While you're submitting your application on our website, girlsclubcollective.co, please be sure to read one of the countless testimonials from our incredible members and alumni. There are so many benefits to being a part of the collective, which is designed around our signature feminine leadership framework. That means you'll have opportunities every month for connection, embodied strategy, visibility, and amplification, and so much more. Don't forget to mention our podcast in the Where Did You Hear About the Cohort section on your application. And now, without further ado, back to the episode. You alluded to the 6 systems that you help people build, and I'm curious if you'd be willing to share what those are, expound on those with us.
Yeah. So it's your authority system. So how do you become known as a recognized authority for your work and become the choice ultimately? There's your revenue model, which is how does your business make money? So your offer structure and your profit model. And there's your client conversion system. So most people call this marketing and sales, but I think it's a virtuous cycle of connecting with human beings, deepening a relationship, converting them through a sales process, and then turning them into champions. There's your internal business operations. So how do you actually deliver the work? How do you organize your business on the back end with time and task management? There's your people systems. How do we build our delightfully tiny teams and treat every stakeholder in our business with the equal amounts of humanity? And then there's the metrics that matter. How are we consistently focused on the goals, project priorities, metrics that indicate the health of our business and where we should spend our time and focus?
No, I love that. I feel like we could have a whole podcast conversation on each one of those, but I know we also touched on business model, and I definitely want to make sure we talk a little bit about that because I, again, really appreciate your perspective in articulating like it's really important to know what our business model even is so that we can actually decide the right strategy because as I know we both know there's like so much out there in terms of like, until you've done this, you can't do this. And until you're like hitting this milestone, like don't waste your time with this. Or like, if you're not doing this one thing, like you'll never make it. Like there's so much noise, right? And all of those things may be true in certain contexts, but they're often only true for like a very specific business model. And they're not being taught in the context of like, let's make sure you have the right business model for this information before you pay thousands of dollars for the information. So I guess where would someone get started if they're like, what is my business model? Like, how can you, as an entrepreneur, someone thinking about starting a business, figure out what yours is or what it might be?
I used to say there's 7 business models. I still do, but I think there's like 3 axes you have to be thinking about. One is, are you serving as a delivery-based business model or a creator-based business model? So do you do hands-on services through yourself or others, or are you kind of selling knowledge around the concept? So that's kind of one axis. The second axis is, do you do short-term or long-term things? So if you're trying to do, you can deliver, for example, website projects, copy projects, or design projects. That's more of a short term, like you do it in 2 weeks and you're done, right? But that means you need a constant influx of new clients. If you can have a long duration, like accounting firms. Like once you find a good accounting firm, you're never going to leave them unless they stop being a good accounting firm. So that changes again the marketing styles that you do and like where you should focus your time and energy. And then solo all the way to scaled. So have you ever read the book, The E-Myth?
No.
I'm about to do, by the time this comes out, maybe I'll have done the YouTube on it. But there's this book that says like the goal of like businesses to document all of the delivery work that you do so that you can systematize it and have someone else do it so you can focus on managing the business. I'm like, well, what if you don't want someone else like delivering your stuff? What if you want to do the delivery? It just highlighted for me how little information there is about how to run a expertise-based business where the founder stays really involved. Like I'm like, there's no book on that. And that's actually what I'm writing is eventually we'll have like the whole book on it, but like there's no book on it. But solo scaled, like you could run a 7-figure business just by yourself. I mean, not just by yourself. You probably need like teams and things like that to support you through like back end because you can't do all the things in your business yourself. Or you can have a team where you scale through success coaches or subcontractors or team members. So when you think about those 3 dimensions, and we didn't get to the 4th dimension, was who your customer is. So it's really 4 dimensions, but that makes the graphic really hard. This really starts to get to like, well, let's say I'm a graphic designer who wants to stay a graphic designer, who doesn't want to do a lot of marketing, and I want to keep, so I'm like, oh, great. Then you need to work with like, find large enough clients you can be on retainer with. It's kind of like a job, and that's really okay. Then I probably wouldn't spend a lot of time marketing or spending time on social media talking to new entrepreneurs. No shade on new entrepreneurs, but like they're not going to be able to like, if you want to serve lots of new entrepreneurs, you're going to have to do a lot of marketing and different kinds of marketing than if you want to serve 2 to 3 people as maybe like a subcontractor to another graphic design firm working with a marketing agency who does all the marketing for you. It's a very old business versus I don't know if your group is familiar with Justin Welsh. He sells $125 like LinkedIn OS courses, and he needs an audience of 200,000 in order to make money selling a $125 course. It's solo, it's highly leveraged and scaled. It's creator based. So those are two wildly different business models that dictate everything about team structure, marketing style, business and profit model, metrics that matter to you. But you got to start with what is it that you're really running.
And where do you see people like get tripped up on that like most often? Because even as you're outlining the axes, I'm like, ooh, for some of these, it maybe for one, it feels really clear, but for others, I'm like somewhere in the middle. And that's like probably not super helpful from a business building perspective.
The biggest mistake is people who run delivery style businesses that don't need a lot of clients are modeling what their teachers do, and their teachers are teaching something, and therefore they need a lot of clients, and therefore they are using what I call scaled and leveraged marketing methods that are actually designed for, I would say, latency and designed for scale because they've had hundreds of interactions before to like dial in on messaging, dial in on the sales process, dial in on the marketing materials. If you try to run your relationship style business through like, setting up the webinars and stuff like that, I'm like, get rid of all of that because you're just adding more friction to the process of like serving someone and having a great experience. So that's the biggest mistake is like mixing the marketing methods designed for large creator style scaled businesses with your small volume, highly relational business.
I have seen that. I have been there. That is so real. Thank you for spelling that out. So like, where do you get started with someone who's like, oh my goodness, yes, I've been doing that. And what do I do to fix it?
Yeah, I'm developing programs to really teach people the lost art of network building and relationship-based revenue. So I have to like deprogram and like the loveliest sense. I'm like, we're not doing lead magnets anymore. We're not selling freebies. I'm like, our job is to get on the phone with people. Our job is to have as many human conversations as we can. And they're like, well, what do I say in the email? And a lot of the pushback I get is this takes too long. And I'm like, because posting on LinkedIn was doing it for you? Because it doesn't do it for me. We have to do things that don't scale in order to scale. We're reaching fewer people, but in a much more high touch, high human way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One other thing that I feel like we would be remiss not to talk about, which I think relates to business model, is how like the concept of the three sisters and planting can also apply to our work and our business. First, for anyone who's not familiar, would you be open to sharing like what the three sisters method of planting is? And then I'd love to talk about like what it has to do with business.
So I got this from Robin Wall Kimmerer's braiding sweetgrass. So I have not experienced this personally, but the three sisters planting method was planting corn, squash, and beans in one pile because the corn grows quickly and adds like structure to the planting. The squash grows most slowly, but provides ground cover for the beans and the corn. And the beans provide nutrients to the soil, which benefit the squash and the corn, but also rely on the corn to twine because otherwise the beans would get an unruly tangle on the ground. So these three planted together provide much apparent, according to the book, provide more food than being planted independently. And so it looks like an unruly mess, but it's actually the most supportive structure for building foods from Native American times.
Oh, thank you so much for explaining that. And I love nature-related metaphor and anything that illustrates this concept of being better together and symbiosis, like than we are on our own and in silos. So like, what does that have to do with a business?
Yeah. So when it comes to business models, almost everyone I work with eventually, like the goal is maybe for some, but for most, especially expertise-based business owners, the goal is not to like always just rely on, I would say, time for dollars type of work. It's to maybe impact more people and to have more of an impact on the world, but also to like start leveraging your time a little bit more. But those things often require different marketing strategies. They require a clear message. They require that if you want to charge low prices somewhere in your business, you have to charge until you have volume and more people paying something, you have to have something in your business that makes money. I love groups. I tried but I had a list of a couple hundred people, and I'm like, I'm going to launch a group. And I got 4 people. And that was really a good conversion rate. But I've had to grow my list double and triple the size to keep enrolling new people into that group. It takes time. The only way I could offer a low price group was by having high priced independent consulting and higher priced one-on-one work. And so I always say, there are things you do for Dharma in the business and things you do because your community needs it. That's the beans. But if we just have beans, we're not going to make money and we're not going to be able to stay in business. So we need something that generates cash and is stable. I call that the corn. And then a lot of times the squash or the lower low and slow group programs or courses or something like that. That's how I built my business is well, I can't put out a self-guided course because I haven't taught it live yet. So let me go teach it live. And then over time, I'll have the audience and the appetite to really create something that's evergreen that I don't have to keep re-recording. That's where it comes in, the corn, the beans, the squash is a portfolio of things in your business that you're all right, over time, I need something that's going to consistently make me money, something that maybe can meet more people. And then I do something that's for the community, but I can't do it for the community if I can't support myself.
Absolutely. Yes, that resonates so much. And I really appreciate how you have described the ecosystem and how to think about the different offers and services that we may provide in our businesses in a more holistic way of what purpose is this serving for me and for my business? And also, what is the corn? Appreciating that if I can't support and sustain myself, then the rest, then the ecosystem is not working. It's not thriving.
Yeah. And, to just have the corn without giving back to the community, without having the beans, without having then it's what are we doing here? If we're, what I find is a lot of times these, Kimmerer talks about strip farming, deforestation and things like that. It's all right, we're going to clear cut this forest and we didn't deposit back in the soil. So now we're just going to go to a new forest. You saw that with, last year, there were some life coaching people who decided to start capitalizing on different celebrities to tap into a new market. I'm oh, well, they've totally stripped the soil of this community. So now you got to go to another community and do the same thing there. And I'm if we don't give back and we don't think about accessible offerings and maybe not things that are free necessarily, but my newsletter, for example, is, you've never bought from me, but yet you probably learn a lot from my newsletter. And that's a free offering. Yes, it's marketing, but it's meant as a act of service and an act of being one with my community. And that's important to me.
Absolutely. I mean, this podcast is very much that. My newsletter, I do think having those access points for being of service to our broader constellation, our broader community of people, when you think about long-term impact, that feels so important to me. And there are so many ways to do that off of social media as well.
I quit Instagram a year ago. I just deactivated my Threads account because I'm this is not how I want to be in relationship or community with people. That's me. That's my own personal choices. And I'm this is not where I want to spend time and energy and focus.
I so appreciate that. I have toyed with the future of my Instagram and the GCC Instagram for a very long time. So if you're listening, don't be surprised if I take a page out of Jessica's book in the not too distant future, which actually, as I say that, I'm speaking of that, you mentioned your book. I want to talk about your book while you're here. I would love to start with, I know you can't share the title with us maybe yet here, but what is the book about?
The book is about when I broke out of corporate. There's rules in corporate. I broke out in entrepreneurship and I'm oh, there's a game to be played here. And I felt overwhelmed with the amount of advice and the amount of noise, the amount of things shouting at me. And I felt the gambles I was being encouraged to take. I'm oh, these are all designed for a specific outcome, which is more, winning, bigger prize, do these things, play these gambles, play these games in order to get the big prize of, I'm not sure what the big prize is anymore, freedom, laptop lifestyle, I'm not sure, whatever the prize is. But what I realized is that all of these tropes, as they call them, all these sanitized advice, were completely taken out of context and were, again, designed to remove your foundational analysis of what does my business actually need? And so the book is all about asking some really big questions about how do we step away from the casino, essentially, of gambling on these tactics and gambling on these tropes. One of the clearest examples is like double your prices. And I'm like, well, maybe you're probably undercharging. That's probably true. But instead of saying just double your prices, charge your worth, whatever that means to you, what do you need to think about before you change your prices? So how do we stop short-circuiting our analysis and start asking some fundamental questions about what is the type of business we're really trying to run and why? And then answer some really big questions about pricing, hiring, business model, offer structure, the seven-figure dream, like how much do you really need? Time management. Let's press all the decisions you want to make through that lens versus through the lens that they're peddling to you. Because basically, if you follow their advice, you know what's going to win? The house. The whole book is like related around a casino gambling theme because it's really like spin to win, play this game. The only person who wins when you play the game is the house. You might get lucky and you might have like a lucky spin, but long term, you're not going to make money.
Absolutely. I'm curious. I know there's so much in this. What lesson or tip or trick or recommendation from the book that maybe you're immersed in writing right now? Or like, is there anything that's like your current favorite darling inside the book in terms of like lessons or advice?
I just wrote the book or the chapter around resilience, and it's about passive income. And everyone's like, I want passive income. And really, I'm like, one, no, there's no passive income. Because even courses that run on repeat, like something changes, like the market shifts, the algorithm shifts, the way you reach your client shifts, the messaging shifts. So like, even if you have a quote unquote evergreen course, like something about how it's managed will be not passive. But resilience and flexibility, and especially once you figure out who your client base really is, like resilience is amazing. So do you need a course? I don't know. Do you need a restructured delivery of how you work? Do you need to systematize things? Do you need to have a little bit more hybrid versus straight up one-on-one? Like there's lots of ways to think about, again, based on your client base and like, what do you need, right? Like I kind of want a course, but some people need to structure their lives around not having lots of calls. And I'm like, great. Maybe it's asynchronous work. Some people really want to take like summers off. And I'm like, great. That's a different type of business structure. So it's really about what kind of resilience and flexibility do you need? And then that informs some of the decisions you can make that allow you to kind of decouple live time and live marketing time and live delivery time from the calendar, as it were.
I like how you're thinking about resilience and positioning resilience in that context. It's because I'm so with you. Like the passive income myth is so everywhere. It is so not real.
My Deeper Foundations course, it was originally 8-10-minute Loom videos where I taught live, but I was like, go watch the video. It is now 167 slides and there's more to be built. And we're doing like ideal client right now. And I'm like, okay, well, I have like, who's your ideal client? But now I have to like add the chapter on interview questions and observations and how to like do a client research project. And I don't have that in my world. I was doing a lot of research, and every book is like how to do customer research for like products. And I'm like, okay, well, how do we do it for services? Like, how can we take this and turn it for expertise-based businesses? I think that's like, if I tried to sell my first round course, one, it would have been bad. Two, I didn't have the audience. And three, I didn't know the questions that were going to come up. But now if I were to 4 years later say like, okay, well, I can add some more material. Some more of it can be self-guided. Some more of it can be self-study. I still don't think I'd ever sell it as a standalone because that doesn't meet the needs of my client. But now I can start to decouple myself from having to explain things over and over again, but only because I've explained things over and over again.
Totally. And I love that you're doing dream client research as one of those things, because I am such a proponent. It is such a transformative practice for actually knowing what people really want and then figuring out how you can talk about it and offer it and structure it in a way that's going to meet what they're actually looking for. So that's awesome. I realize we're coming up on time. I could talk to you forever, but the one other thing I wanted to make sure to ask you while you're here is about leadership, which is a really big theme on the podcast this season. What does leadership mean to you right now, or how are you currently thinking about leadership?
So I think there's leadership, in multiple facets. There's self-leadership, there's team leadership, there's community leadership, there's client leadership. But I think it's really important to say, what kind of capacity do I have at this moment in time? And what kind of leader, where do I have the capacity to be a leader? A lot of people in my world had really bad managers, don't have really good experience managing others, and don't want to replicate that for others. But I think there's a way to be a leader and a manager in a way that sets clear expectations and makes the implicit explicit, and about to rewrite the hiring chapter. And I think like tossing stuff over the wall is not leadership, even if you're a team leader. And assuming people can read your mind is not leadership. In my mind, how can I say like, is leadership a responsibility that I want to carry the mantle of? And I think it's like, let's stop being like, oh, you had $100,000, time to hire your first employee. If you aren't the VA, you are the assistant. I'm like, well, maybe someone doesn't want to have the responsibility to manage somebody else. And so how do we not like require that like promotion requires being a leader and a people manager, and say that there's a lot of ways to exist in business without necessarily being responsible for someone else's employment? And if we choose to take that up, can we do it responsibly? Can we do it well?
Right. And I think even going back to what you first said on this is like, what is your individual capacity right now in this moment? Because that can change. It does change. There are seasons for that. And I think starting with any question like this from a place of like, what do I actually have right now to offer or to give, as opposed to what I should do, is such a healthy way to start, at least in the conversation. Well, thank you so much. Again, I could talk to you forever. I'm so honored that you are coming to guest teach inside the GCC Entrepreneurs Magic Mind cohort. We talked about business models and Three Sisters and other fun stuff, which I'm really looking forward to. For people who are listening who know that they need more Jessica Lackey in their lives, what's the best place for people to find you, to follow you, to stay in touch with you, and learn more about your work?
The best place to follow me is at jessicalackey.com. And if you go to /welcome, you can subscribe to the newsletter. You can do that from the home site too, but you can subscribe to my newsletter. And then every month I teach a free business building class, because that's my beans and the Three Sisters, and would love to see you there. I'm still active on LinkedIn, but less so these days. It's not where I'm being conscious of my mental energy. You will not find me on the other platforms though. So follow me on my newsletter, follow me on LinkedIn, and you can follow my YouTube channel.
Amazing. Well, we'll definitely be sure to include those links in the show notes. And I will also just put in an enthusiastic recommendation. I love your newsletter. I learn a lot from your newsletter. So definitely say, for anyone listening who wants to do business thoughtfully, intentionally, through a long-term lens that like respects your capacity and well-being, like Jessica is the person to follow along with, and I cannot wait to read your book. Thank you so much, Jessica, for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Women Changing the World podcast. Please rate and review the podcast wherever you're currently listening to it, and don't forget to subscribe for future episodes. You can find me on Instagram at liz.best, that's lis.best, and you can find Girls Club Collective at girls_club_collective. You can also find us on LinkedIn by searching for Liz Best, that's my name, LASBEST, and Girls Club Collective. Join our mail list by visiting the Girls Club Collective homepage and scrolling down to the bottom. You'll be in the loop on upcoming events, retreats, and opportunities to make magic with us, and you'll also receive a monthly love note from my heart to your inbox. I am so excited to keep in touch.